Hi, my name is Hannah Mörsberger and I am part of Work Package 2.
My name is Ian McCallum and I'm co-leading the Work Package 2, which is stakeholder engagement in EuropaBON.
My name is Jessie Juncker and I'm involved in all of the work packages of EuropaBON because I'm co-coordinating EuropaBON together with Enrique Pereira.
I'm Luis Bretons. I'm a researcher, senior researcher at CREAF in Barcelona in Spain.
Hello, my name is EuropaBON. I'm Professor of Ecosystem Services and work at IDIV, and I co-lead the Work Package 2 of stakeholder involvement.
My name is Enrique Pereira. I'm the coordinator of the EuropaBON project, and I'm a professor at IDIV, the German Center for Integrative Biodiversity Research, and the University of Halle, Wittenberg.
I'm Maria Dornelas. I am a professor at the Center for Biological Diversity, School of Biology, University of St. Andrews, and I am a macroecologist studying biodiversity change.
My name is Nestor Fernandez, and I am the leader of one Work Package 5, which is about showcasing EuropaBON and the methods and the monitoring tools for specific policies.
My name is Anne Lykke Solheim, and I'm the co-lead for Work Package 5 of EuropaBON, and I'm also responsible for one of the showcases in that work package, which is the Water Framework Directive showcase.
I come from the social sciences. I studied anthropology, sociology, and political sciences.
My professional background is forestry, actually. I studied forestry in Canada and combined that also with geographic information services and remote sensing.
I'm a biologist, I'm an ecologist, that's my field of work, and before I came to EuropaBON, I was a postdoc working in grade A conservation research at the Max Planck Institute.
I've been working for many years on monitoring at the national and European scale, and I'm also been involved in this monitoring at the European scale at the EBCC, the European Bird Census Council, which I also represent in EuropaBON. I did my PhD in the University of Barcelona and in Finland with behavioral ecology. So I started working with behavioral ecology, but I always at the early stage, I moved more to a landscape ecology. So I got interested in larger spatial scales and the processes of biodiversity at those large spatial scales. And then immediately that was linked quite rapidly to the monitoring of those processes and biodiversity at those large spatial scales. So I got involved in monitoring of vertebrates and especially of birds. So I got involved even in the designing of atlas and long-term monitoring projects first in Catalonia in Spain, and then quite rapidly I got involved also in how those projects could be integrated at European level with the EBCC, with the work of the EBCC, of the European Bird Census Council, and also from those early stages, trying to move quite rapidly to the integration of research, monitoring, and policy. So I've been involved in not only in the production of that information and the monitoring of that information, but also on the interpretation and the mobilization of that information in policy making, and especially in Catalonia.
So I'm a biologist and I'm interested in the linkages between people and nature.
I have a PhD in ecology, and I've worked both as a scientist, but also as a practitioner.
I originally trained as a marine biologist, but currently I'm really a macroecologist working both with marine, terrestrial and freshwater ecosystems. A lot of my work involves data synthesis, so I guess sort of spreading into statistics and computer science as well.
I'm a biodiversity scientist.
I'm a limnologist by training, which is a lake expert, trained in biology and chemistry, and I have worked with also climate change and nutrient pollution of lakes and the impacts on algal blooms in lakes. I have also worked with the Water Framework Directive, developing typology for different lakes and rivers, and also the classification system for ecological status for the different parts of the biology.
I am probably a bit of an outsider within EuropaBON as a social scientist among many, many natural scientists. But then again, of course, having studied political sciences helps a lot in finding out about policy users and policymakers' needs, understanding policy, analyzing policy. So I think in that sense, it's relevant.
My expertise is relevant here because of the background in forestry and remote sensing. I think that a lot of the data that's required for biodiversity monitoring is in fact, it's necessary to turn to some of these new and novel technologies. So remote sensing being one of those. That's a very good opportunity to do wall-to-wall kind of mapping of certain variables that are required. In addition, we do a lot of work with citizen science, and that's another real opportunity to fill a lot of the data gaps that exist. And then there are many other opportunities to look into in terms of data streams, be it from drones or from wearable sensors, social media. So there's a lot of different opportunities there, and so those are kind of some of the tools that we're looking at, and I think that's some of the expertise that we bring to the project.
I have a lot of biomonitoring experience. Even though I was involved in biomonitoring of large mammals, specifically great apes, not in European ecosystems, in tropical ecosystems, I think that it helps me a lot to understand the project and to understand the methods and the caveats associated with the different methods.
I think that what is very nice about EuropaBON is it's a kind of melting pot. It's a place where research, monitoring, and policy actually merges. So that's very interesting because usually you start like in one of these three different facets, and they are very complementary, but they are very different because the constraints are very different. We have been, or I have personally been, quite involved in this melting pot of facets at the Catalan level or the national level. But to find a project like EuropaBON where you can work on that at the European level with so many people and so many relevant initiatives is really great.
I've worked in many different settings, both in the national park and in an NGO, as well as for IUCN and in research, and I hope I can bring this experience to EuropaBON to form a user-oriented biodiversity observation network.
I worked 3 years as director of protected area, in reality a system of protected areas in northern Portugal, and I've been in, let's say, both sides of the fence. So I have these both experiences, both from the conservation management and from the scientific side.
My marine background helps to ensure that we are not ignoring the marine realm in and how it's monitoring and specific challenges to monitoring the marine realm, but also my background in terms of synthesis of different sources of biodiversity data in the build-up of the Biotime database is also very relevant to the project. From the point of view of novel technologies, in my empirical work, I'm engaged with using autonomous vehicles to collect imagery underwater and combining that with more traditional sampling to help us figure out how we can maximize extent and resolution in biodiversity monitoring.
So in EuropaBON, we want to make a difference in developing new monitoring workflows, methods and it needs to be really based on like basic concepts, basic ecological concepts, and concepts of biodiversity and biodiversity change. So the whole thing is around biodiversity, actually.
I think it's relevant because EuropaBON is about biodiversity monitoring, and the Water Framework Directive classification system for ecological status is very much about assessing ecological integrity of different groups of biological organisms, like fish, or benthic invertebrates, or macrophytes, so plants, or algae.
I am mostly responsible for the user and policy needs assessment, which is one of EuropaBON's first major deliverables. It looks at what users and policymakers actually need from EuropaBON and what they need from biodiversity monitoring data.
So in EuropaBON, we are leading the work package 2 on stakeholder engagement, and we are first of all trying to build up as large as possible a membership in EuropaBON, so reaching out to the wider biodiversity community and trying to engage with them and have them get involved in the project so that they can also provide information to us on user needs, policy needs, but also to receive information from the project.
I'm leading Work Package 3. Work Package 3 is about identifying gaps and bottlenecks in monitoring at European scale. So we are developing a monitoring database in which we are mapping the current workflows of monitoring, biodiversity monitoring in Europe, from the raw data and the collection of the data in the field to actually policy, and how this data collected at the national scale is being integrated on what we call hubs, integration hubs at the national scale and the European scale, and how that information also fits in the essential biodiversity variables that actually are feeding policy. So the idea is that the information that feeds into Work Package 4 and 5 by setting the current scene of these workflows and where the gaps and bottlenecks might be. I'm also responsible within EuropaBON of one of the study cases on birds, on the birds directive. So we're trying to identify there what would be the workflows that are currently not in place, so that we are able to develop more frequent spatiotemporal data sets at the European level for birds.
My role as a coordinator is to ensure an overall integration of all the teams that we have and of the many scientists and at large the community that we are engaging, so that we can deliver a biodiversity monitoring system that is consistent across disciplines, across regions, across countries. I see my role as keeping an internal consistency of all of this work.
Within EuropaBON, I'm involved in several work packages, and I'm leading one particular task that is focused on figuring out whether and how novel technologies can contribute to improving biodiversity monitoring in Europe and I guess elsewhere as well.
So what I do is to coordinate 5 different showcases which address policies that are important at the European level. Those are the Birds Directive, the Habitats Directive, Water Framework, and also restoration policies. And I'm trying to coordinate all those different showcases in a way that they go, let's say, in the same track. Yeah? So they deliver similar data that can be used to inform those policies, but also other important questions about biodiversity change.
I hope that we can contribute to harmonizing the design of monitoring of biodiversity across Europe. So trying to reduce the difference between the design that is used in different countries, so that the data can become more comparable across countries to provide a more confident picture of biodiversity in Europe as a whole.
What I find most inspiring about EuropaBON is probably to be part of bringing two worlds together, the world of natural scientists working on monitoring, very technical work mostly, and then the world of policymakers who try to bring together so many different communities, preferences, values. They often don't speak the same language, they often misunderstand each other, and I think understanding both worlds, at least I wouldn't say I understand them deeply, but at least in a superficial way, is, I think, very useful in that project, and that's also very exciting to be part of, trying to translate the two different languages and worlds to each other.
What's inspiring in EuropaBON is this opportunity to meet a lot of different people that are working across the biodiversity sector, if you will, and so there's a lot of different experts who have different needs, and so there's a lot to learn here, I think, for myself and for everybody in the project. There's also a real interest in the project from the European Commission, so I think that's nice to be working on a project where you see there is this real need and interest in what the project's doing. So I think that is also really important. But lots of new information out there. So lots of new techniques, and I think there's a lot there that we can contribute to. And I think that for me is really interesting.
I expect that EuropaBON delivers a blueprint for a monitoring system that can serve the needs of the various stakeholders that are involved in the project, including policymakers, but also researchers, the business sector, NGOs, and citizen scientists, for example. And I hope that it can integrate these different interests and needs, and that it will deliver the system that can then hopefully be implemented with through a biodiversity coordination center.
Very often research, we might claim that we are very relevant for decision making, and then we produce relevant information, or we can actually provide with optimal designs for monitoring like that, but very often we are far away, so we just make the proposal. But EuropaBON and the way the EuropaBON is set and working with the Commission and with the stakeholders actually makes that as very different from most of the research projects where I've been involved. So actually this proposal might have a quite bright future, because it's not just some very few researchers that have proposed it, but it's like working with a lot of stakeholders. So I'm very excited about what EuropaBON is actually proposing, and the community that EuropaBON is creating at this interface between science, policy, and monitoring world.
I find it inspiring to work with so many fun and experienced people who bring lots of ideas, a lot of skills, expertise in order to jointly co-design EuropaBON.
It is to interact with the other community that have been using biodiversity observations for several decades, and try to build bridges between the Water Framework Directive methods and data sets to the biodiversity data sets in terms of species distribution patterns and habitat quality.
EuropaBON is a really interesting project to be part of because of its co-design approach in wanting to include multiple stakeholders, from scientists to policymakers to end users, in the design of biodiversity monitoring. And as someone who has been involved in collating other people's data to gain a greater insight into how biodiversity is changing more broadly, it's very obvious how we have gaps as well as overlaps in the types of data that we collect. And I feel EuropaBON has a really important role to play in terms of ensuring that in the future we end up with more representative biodiversity monitoring.
And so the idea of EuropaBON is to develop a monitoring system, to design a system that allows us to answer these policy needs.